Hello, thank you for joining me for another podcast of Losing Faith, Finding Spirit. Today I want to talk about how your childhood, relationships, trauma, other such things during childhood impact and lay down a foundation for your life. So the things that happened in your childhood lay down a foundation for your future. And we're going to talk about what that looks like and what that means here in just a moment. If you hear noise, it's because I'm doing things in the background. I'm recording while I do stuff. First thing, psychology talks about romantic interests. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. So, the relationships with your parents, especially if they're tumultuous, will affect your romantic partners going forward. It affects how your subconscious understands and looks for love. There's a lot of studies behind this, and people have come to realize that it really does impact. I mean, there's the whole Freud thing where it's like, girls are in love with their daddies and boys are in love with their mommies, and that's your first love. Gender aside, because gender is not the element here. It's actually more having to do with your understanding of love as a child. Those building blocks of what makes you feel safe and secure. And if you don't have safety and security in your childhood, you, on a subconscious level, search for that same instability as an adult, because that is what you understand and what you know. If you are constantly flooded in fear and anxiety, and if you deal with depression and other such issues as a child, that's your foundation. That is what you know. Everything else is built on top of that. It is very hard to break those patterns and those false beliefs, those insecurities, all of those things that have been instilled in you in your childhood. It's really almost impossible to break those without being very consciously aware of what went awry. So when I say that, for me, I'm going to use myself as an example here. My father was an alcoholic, is still to this day an alcoholic. Instead of telling us as a family and being like, hey, we as a family need to use less water in the shower. You guys need to be more mindful. Let's figure out a way that we can all work together to make this happen. Instead of doing that, which is a healthy thing, that is how a real healthy unit works. You have family meetings, you discuss things, you try to figure things out together as a family. That's not how my family was. Instead of saying anything about the shower and people taking too long in the shower, he literally would shove things into the shower head to block the water flow so that we would be limited by how much water we could access. Unfortunately for him, I'm very intelligent, and I noticed something was wrong, and I took the thing apart and fixed it. But that's the kind of passive-aggressive behavior that I grew up with, the very petty, not telling things straight out. There's always like this underhand, read between the lines kind of thing I grew up with. And my mother is on the narcissist scale. She falls into more of a covert, vulnerable narcissist. A lot of that probably comes from her own codependency issues with having an alcoholic partner, but it also comes from some sort of trauma that she refuses to acknowledge and deal with from her past. I can say that very clearly without being too emotional because I've worked through a lot of the things to understand them, and that is part of the problem. So, because I have two unwell parents, one who is stuck in, my father probably has some sort of disorder as well. I don't know what, but he probably has something else going on that causes the addiction. I know that he had a traumatic childhood and he refuses to acknowledge any of that trauma in childhood. The instability and the mistrust in my childhood affected my ability to see romantic interactions as an adult in a clear way. It was clouded by that need for love. And I thought I was aware of this. when I was in college and met my ex-husband. I was completely convinced that I had this all figured out. Oh, I know what codependency is. I'm a psychology major. I got this. I'm fine. I'm an adult. I know what I'm doing. But it took many, many years. It took having a child of my own for me to see that I had married an alcoholic with a personality or other disorders who refuses to acknowledge his issues. He will not take responsibility for anything. And my mom was that way. She would not take responsibility for anything gone wrong. Every apology out of her mouth was with a but, and always pushed the blame onto someone else. Like, oh, I shouldn't have listened to all those people at church when you were young, and that's my bad. They got me to think things and say things that I shouldn't have. So it wasn't, that's not her saying from a sincere, I realize what I did wrong and I will make it my best to never let that happen again. That's a sincere apology is, I did not intend to hurt you. I know I did wrong. I am working to understand how to change my behaviors so that I won't do those things in the future. And then the behavior follows. My ex was really good at apologizing. My ex could say the exact words I needed to hear, wanted to hear, but the actions never followed through. Definitely just kind of used it as an excuse, like, I drink so much, I know it's bad for me, but work so hard. Nobody understands how hard it is for me at work. And that's it. There would never be like, this is why it's hard, and I need to do these things to fix it. Or if we did get a little bit of that, like, hey, here's some things you can do to fix it, he would never follow through on those things. Like, maybe it's not the alcohol, I just need to wake up on time every day. It's been 15 years and you have yet to wake up on time every day, and I have to wake you up. No. And my other thing, like, I don't want to wake you up in the morning. You're an adult. You should be responsible for getting yourself up. You're just telling me when breakfast is ready. What does it matter what state I'm in? That's the kind of narcissistic gaslighting and manipulation that I lived with. And that's the emotional abuse that I dealt with. That's just surface level stuff that I had to deal with. It got worse, of course, it does. But that's the stuff because in my childhood, I became the therapist of my family. So my mother would come to me, probably I was 7, 8 at the most, at the oldest. She would come to me at night when my brother and sister were asleep, keep me up at night. This is also a narcissist thing I learned much later, just recently actually. A narcissist will keep you up at night. That's where they feel their power is strongest, because they're making you weak by keeping you away from getting the needed sleep that you have. And they will talk to you until they're satisfied. Until you give up because you're tired and you're frustrated, until you snap back, or until you just say whatever you want, just leave me alone. I just need to get some sleep. They love that. They feel it gives them this power trip. So my mom would keep me up at night and tell me about all the terrible things that my father was doing, or what a terrible person my father was, and how she's so miserable. And then she'd tell me about her ex-husband who cheated on her. I'm like 7 years old, and I'm like listening to my mother gripe and complain and like cry to me, the 7-year-old, about my father and how hard she had it. And that became the basis of our relationship. And I will never forget the thing she said to me more than once. She said, every time I wanted to leave your father, I got pregnant with one of you kids. And can you imagine being a 7-year-old and your mother, the person who's supposed to love and support you, and that unconditional love, the person that's supposed to teach you that, the safety, the unconditional love, all of that. Can you imagine your mother telling you that you're the reason she's stuck in this miserable life? Because that's what in essence, that's the message I internalized from those words. And I don't, to this day, I don't see how you can internalize it any other way. I don't see how those words, every time I wanted to leave your father, I got pregnant with one of you kids. I don't see how that could be interpreted any other way, except for being like, it's your fault. Like, blame the kids. And this is why I believe my mother is a narcissist, the covert, vulnerable narcissist, because of that mentality. The mentality of someone that thinks that this is somebody else's fault. And in a way that makes them look like a victim and a martyr. Like, I'm giving up everything because I'm doing what's best for my kids. You know, that's the mentality that this is coming from. Is like, look at me, I'm such a good person. I can't leave because I'm afraid for my kids. It's an excuse, and it keeps her in that relationship. And now, because they're still married, it's been 30 something, 40 years. I don't even know now. How old am I? Yeah, it's almost been 40 years that they've been together, married. And they only once in all of those years almost got like a divorce, and then they got back together. And she'll tell me now to this day, I never should have took him back after that. I don't know what I was thinking. And anytime I bring up, which I don't, I try not to talk about my divorce, but ever since I got divorced, she brings up her marriage every time we see each other, because I think seeing me makes her feel that narcissistic shame. So she has to kind of make excuses for herself for staying in a bad marriage. But I never asked for that. I'm tired of that. In fact, those are the foundations of my life. My relationship with my mother I was the emotional support. I was the therapist, and I took on the responsibility of everything that was wrong. So I felt like it was my responsibility to make my mother happy, my responsibility to make sure my brothers and sisters were safe. It was my responsibility. That attitude, that mindset of being the responsible, the emotional support of my mother is what I took into my abusive marriage, because when we were dating, my ex and I, he was very emotional. He would be very open up. He would cry to me. I would sing and comfort him. I really felt kind of like I took on a maternal role for him, and that's what I didn't realize that is the foundation that my mother had built. And what happened after that is, as the abuse started to kind of unfold, I found excuses. He's just stressed because of work. He's stressed because of school. He's stressed because of X, Y, Z. Because I had to make up those excuses as a child to endure parents who are incapable of loving in a healthy way. You have to come up with excuses, because as a child, you need your parents' love. That is a basic human need. We now know there's lots of stuff on there. And that need for love makes you rationalize the behavior, and especially when you're a child. So your foundation is a mess. My foundation was a hot mess. Is there a foundation? Can you even call that a foundation? So I built the structure thinking I was I subconsciously wanted somebody who would choose me over alcohol, because my father never chose anything else but alcohol. So I wanted to be chosen over alcohol, and I ended up getting involved with somebody who had an alcohol use problem. And I didn't see it right away because he hid it in some cases, and in other cases, I rationalized it because we were in college when we met, and everybody's drinking in college, and I'm like, maybe I'm taking this too extreme. And I had an ex-boyfriend who was like, "What? I can't have a beer? Are you really, you're not going to date anyone who drinks?" And that kind of made me reevaluate my value on alcohol use. It was my fatal flaw, y'all. I'm not going forward with nobody who drinks. I can't even social drinking. I'm not doing that again. I'm not putting myself in that place. That is a boundary that I've set. And if that means that my relationships are extremely limited, fine. I'd rather not deal with that again. That stress of, is this person gonna choose me or choose alcohol? Is this person gonna get drunk and get angry and start raging and breaking things? Is this person gonna start screaming at me and keeping me up all night? Is this person gonna get sexually aggressive because they've been drinking? Is this person going to get out of control? Is this person going to flirt with somebody else? Is this, like, everything that I've experienced because of alcohol, I don't ever want to experience again. And I'd rather be single and alone to the day I freaking die than deal with that nonsense. I am enough all by myself, and I'm not afraid to be alone. That's a rant all on its own, but I compromised my values. I compromised in other areas just to be with this person because I needed love, and dealing with all the chaos of my family, which had gotten really bad when I started dating and when I was in college, because I was really trying to become my own independent person and figure out myself. While still living at home, I don't recommend that. I recommend moving out if you can. Take out a loan and get out. If your parents are any kind of abuse, get out, because you need to be alone and heal and start that path of healing as soon as you are capable financially. I know not all of us can do that. I get it. I'm so sorry. There is hope. You can find a way to get out, though. Even now, even though I'm struggling financially, even though I don't know what the next day is going to look like for finding a job or doing anything with my son, I am much, much better off now than being in that miserable marriage. No amount of money can heal my heart. No amount of money can fix what's broken when it comes to that kind of nonsense and the abuse. No money, it's not worth it. So I say all of this because I want you to know that if you've suffered any kind of abuse, especially from your parents as a child, that trauma in your childhood is going to later on affect you very deeply. And it's so deep that you aren't even always aware of it. It took me almost 20 years to recognize this. I understood it conceptually. Like, yeah, I get that. I need to be aware of codependency. I need to work on my codependency issues. But I became codependent in a lot of ways. And then my ex, again, because he's abusive, would take that codependency and be like, you're just acting codependent. You need to get over it. I'm just helping you, pushing you to get over your codependency while leaving me alone at a party with a bunch of strangers. But I trusted him and I believed him because the people in my life before were messed up. And during the courtship phase, when the dating, it was intense, y'all. Narcissists woo you. Woo you. They will over the top, intense. And they don't give you a chance to breathe. You don't have a chance to breathe. You are with them, like that. They consume your energy all of the time. And even when that phase, it's called love bombing, by the way, where it's literally like you're so passionate and you're like the most romantic elements that you could ever imagine are happening all of the time. Even after that phase of love bombing ends, the amount of energy and emotional capacity that they take within your life, your body, your mind, your soul is intense. It's intense. You can't let that go. And they do that, and they give you little breadcrumbs where every now and then you feel like, oh, but they do love me. Look, they did this cute little nice thing. But if you compare it to the beginning phases, it really is a breadcrumb. Like a little tiny crumb. Barely anything. It's not love. I could get into that, but I'll save that for another podcast. So just be mindful. If you've had any kind of childhood trauma, you really need to search to those wounds, the parents' wounds, whether that's the mother wound, the father wound, whatever wound that is, and heal those before you get involved in somebody. And I very highly recommend that if they have any semblance to your parents. Some people go in the opposite direction and they try to find people who are completely different. But I'm telling you, that weird system inside of yourself that doesn't understand what love is, that doesn't understand what healthy relationships look like, that is so hard to overcome. It's so hard. And for me, it starts with finding myself, finding spirit, right? Finding the inner knowing, getting in touch with what I really like, dating myself. That's where I'm at right now in my journey. But I didn't have the capacity for that. I didn't have the peace to even think about myself. I went for people who needed to be rescued, who needed emotional support, because I was the emotional support in my family. And even that, forget the alcoholism, forget the really obvious stuff, which I still fell for, you guys. Like, I still fell into that subconsciously. Married an alcoholic. The one thing I said I would never freaking do. Even on that level of my role in my house. If you have narcissistic parents, if you have parents who have been emotionally abusive in any way, whether it's through neglect or they smothered you. In my case, it was enmeshment. That's where my mother basically said I was a mini version of her. She can't differentiate us, which is why even now, because I got divorced from the alcoholic, she keeps kind of feeling narcissistic shame and feeling like she has to prove herself to me every time when nobody asked. Like, I don't care. You make your choices, I'll make mine. Like, you are a separate person from me. That's enmeshment. She can't see us as separate entities. And she constantly puts her own thoughts and values. It's also a little bit of limerence, but I'll save that for a whole nother thing. We can talk about both of those, enmeshment and limerence, in a whole different podcast. But the role I played within my house as the listener, as the emotional support, as the validator, I validated my mom like you would not believe, became my role in the romantic relationships. I needed to find partners who needed that, because I felt like I didn't know. This was all subconscious. This was all buried deep within the emotions, the heart and mind. I didn't know I was looking for that. That is what I was searching for. And when I look back at the relationships, the more crushes that I felt, the stronger I felt towards a person was based on how much I was the therapist in the relationship, how much I was the little mother in the relationship. And that's how I ended up with my ex, is because at the time when we were dating, he needed that. And I felt very strongly that that was a good connection. And obviously, that's the end result, is it was not. So be mindful of the patterns that you had, the roles that you had in childhood. Be mindful of how your parents showed love. Did they show love by screaming and yelling every night? If that is something that you were used to, that might be something that you end up doing in your marriage and in your romantic relationships. I didn't think nothing of it, y'all. We would yell, like, no problem, scream, break things. That was what I grew up in. So I just didn't think that was an issue. And now I know that that's ridiculous. Like, that's no. And because I would yell or because I would lose it, then the guilt and shame I felt would make me feel like I needed to stay and fix it, like it was my fault. It just reiterated that whole, like, I'm the emotional responsible one. Everything is my fault. The blame. And now I know that narcissists, there's something called retroactive abuse, and it's where a narcissist will push and push and push and push until you snap back, and then they're like, oh, look at you, you're so childish, you can't even handle this conversation, after they've been like berating you for over an hour and pushing you in all of your buttons because they know all of your weaknesses. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, when I just learned that recently, retroactive abuse, it blew my mind, because that was one of the biggest patterns of our relationship. And that was the biggest thing that kept me stuck, because I kept feeling like it was my fault. But when I think back, all of those arguments, whenever I snapped, it was because he wouldn't let go. I'd say, I need time to calm down. I need to relax. I need to think this over. Please just give me a few minutes. And he would never let up. He would literally follow me room to room, yelling at me, arguing at me. And once I finally got control of my own emotions and stopped reacting, which, It feels like you kill yourself to do that, and you have to, and it's the only way to survive. But it's so unhealthy, emotionally and mentally. It's just so draining. Everything about that. I'm so burned out just from that marriage. I mean, and it was it was like almost 20-year relationship. So, of course, I'm burned out. I don't even know how I'm standing and talking right now sometimes. I'm burned out. It fizzles you dry. It saps you. It's like a vampire sucking you out till you're nothing left. It's awful. I don't recommend it. So if somebody's acting like that, if you're starting to see those patterns in your relationships, you need to end the relationship. You need to take some step backs. You need to get some space. You need to work on yourself and work on your parents and your relationship. You don't have to work on your relationship with your physical parents. I'm talking about the emotional relationship inside of you. And you need to learn to be your own parent. That's the biggest thing. When I finally sat down and worked on my inner child, I started trying to reparent myself. I really started working on the inner, like the mother wound. I started just I imagined who I was at 7 years old. I imagined some of the things that I went through, some of the hardships that I faced that, of course, adults don't think are important, but as a kid, it's the most important thing in the world. And I held myself in my mind and I comforted and I thought, what would I need as a child in those moments? And I gave myself that. And then sometimes that's what I do now. Sometimes I'll be like, if I had a partner if I had a healthy mother or partner, what would I want somebody to do for me? And then I do that for myself. Like if I'm feeling stressed out and I'm like, I don't want to cook, what would I wish somebody would do for me right now? I wish somebody would give me dinner and I don't have to cook. Okay, well, I'm going to go get us dinner. Let's order out. Let's order in. That's a simple thing, but I've learned to start doing that and it's been very healthy. That's one way that I've done. There's also like meditating, finding some guided meditations for like healing inner children, the inner child meditations. I recommend those. A lot of it is visual work where you kind of have to visualize and remember you as a child and just kind of think of how you as a parent would act towards you as a child, and then do that kind of, visually and mentally. Like imagine yourself giving yourself a hug, imagine what your little child would say, and imagine what yourself as a very elderly person looking back on your life would say. And then that kind of just, for me, those are the things that kind of helped me heal and work through some of this stuff. It also helped looking at my parents as people, like thinking of them as like from like a third perspective instead of like right there in the middle of it. Like taking a step back and like reevaluating them as kind of like if this was a movie or a book and these were just characters. Like what's their backstory? What's going on? What's their motivations? That's how I'm able to now talk about it in such a almost desensitized way. It's because I've spent a lot of time kind of breaking down. That's something that I needed for me. I don't recommend that for everybody because sometimes it can be frustrating. It is frustrating because you're like, hello, like stop doing this. Like be an adult. Come on, grow up. Treat people better. Own up to your own actions. Can you not see that what you're doing is hurting somebody? Like all of that. But anyways, that is it from me. Thank you for listening in and tuning in. I hope that you do well on your inner child work and healing. I'm sure there are lots of different things that you can do. Those are just some of the things that I've done that have been most helpful for me. Journaling is another thing. I don't journal because my mother used to read all of my journals, so I feel very awkward journaling. I do it sometimes on the computer, and I have a little document that I add to every now and then, but journaling is a hard thing for me to do because of that, and that's a shame because I've heard lots of good things about journaling. I find meditation and visual stuff to work best for me, visualizing the inner child and the inner mother. Healing that inner child has been the best for me personally. So I hope you find your way and be mindful of those patterns. Again, the biggest thing is once you're aware that those patterns exist, once you're aware that that history exists, it makes it easier for you to be aware of what you're doing in the present day and see those patterns and see those red flags ahead of time instead of after the fact. And then you are much wiser and stronger because of it. So just even being aware of those systems and the toxic relationships and those patterns and what role you played as a child and what unhealthy love your parents taught you, those are so important just to know, because that's going to make you much more aware of what you, when you're in a relationship, are they replicating that? Are you getting those same, are you falling into those old patterns? And then you can take a break, take a step back, slow the relationship down, reevaluate, and work through it. And sometimes if you're in a very healthy relationship, not a toxic one, if you're with somebody who is very emotionally and mentally healthy, they'll work with you and you can heal together, and it just strengthens you. But you have to just be very mindful, because if you become vulnerable with somebody who is abusive, it becomes a weapon in their hands. So